Hey, Period Party podcast family. Wow, that's a mouthful. Thank you for being here with me for another episode where we're navigating the intersection of menstrual health, advocacy, and empowerment. This week, I am talking to the lovely Mimi Millard, founder and CEO of the supplement company Lune Wellness. With a background in environmental engineering and a personal mission fueled by her own struggles with period pain and PMS, Mimi is revolutionizing the way we approach menstrual wellness through Lune. In today's episode, we tackle the pervasive myths surrounding endometriosis, exploring why it's crucial for everyone to care about this condition and the societal consequences of neglecting it. Mimi shares her journey of discovering alternative treatments for period pain and discusses the profound impact that alternative approaches have on endometriosis and overall health. From the challenges of lengthy diagnosis times to the importance of endometriosis allyship, we delve into the complexities of this condition and how we can support those affected. Plus, Mimi covers what individuals should be aware of and what criteria they should consider when selecting supplements or other relief methods to add to their menstrual pain relief toolkit. And finally, Mimi sheds light on Lune's March campaign, which is Endometriosis Awareness Month, in case you didn't know, and the vital role of initiatives like giving away their signature product, Cramp Aid, for free to endo warriors in raising awareness and providing support. You'll find more information at Lune Care on Instagram and at their website, delune.co. Thank you so much for being here. I couldn't do this without you. I appreciate your support so much. I really hope you love this episode. Hi, Mimi. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
I am thrilled to have you, and I feel like just our preliminary conversation was so juicy and good. So I'm really excited to delve into all the things we're going to talk about today. In fact, I don't know that I've really covered this so much on the podcast, so I think it'll be really good for the audience. But it's funny, just this morning, and this is what sort of started me thinking about what I wanted to really talk about today. I posted just a post on Instagram about the history of the birth control pill and why it's still the most popular form of birth control on the market. And I got a comment, and it's inevitable every time. I got this comment from this woman saying that outside of surgery for endometriosis, the pill is really the only solution. So basically, don't knock the pill, Nicole. And I was like, well, I'm actually not knocking the pill. I'm just talking about the fact that it's still the most important, it's still the most commonly used birth control method. And so I've just found, right, I hear this over and over again, that basically you have no options, particularly with endometriosis, these chronic type conditions, than to turn off your sex hormones with a pill or have surgery and just hope for the best. And I feel like, this is kind of, and I bet you can talk to this too, like the end result of how big pharma has captured healthcare, in that people don't even realize that endo isn't even a gynecological condition in the first place, and that how you eat and live have this profound effect on this disease and, all diseases, but that's a story for another day. And so I feel like your experience really led you to finding alternatives to treat period pain. And I would love for you to share a bit about how you got to do this work and how you got to where you are today with Lune.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you for framing it in that context. I think it's so important to keep these conversations going on social media about birth control and about endo and all of the different disease states that we're suffering from, because yes, they are the severe end of the spectrum of menstrual related issues or cycle related issues, but often it takes those severe states for people to actually take action and pay attention. And so if that's how we can get, drug practitioners, like different practitioners, drug makers, and dietary supplements formulators to pay attention and start creating better solutions, great, let's start there. So for me personally, I don't have endometriosis as far as I know. I'll talk more about that. But I grew up with very severe dysmenorrhea, just period cramping. Day 1 and day 2 were so painful that I would have to skip school. And it really reached a climax for me in college when I was missing these really critical lab sessions that I had to do for my degree. And I was studying environmental engineering. A lot of my classmates did not have a menstrual cycle. And it just felt so frustrating that I would be behind on certain lab sessions or on certain assignments because I had this overwhelming pain for a couple days each month. And so that really pushed me into this desperate need state. And I, like many of us, was put on birth control on and off, different types for many years. I also ended up taking a lot of over-the-counter painkillers, mostly non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like your typical, ibuprofen, Midol. And I developed serious side effects. This was not a conversation. I was not, informed of the side effects that I could develop over time. It was just kind of, here's what we have, try it out, see what happens. And what happened was I really had some GI issues, some fatigue issues, and I ended up actually having worse cramps, which landed me in the campus hospital one cycle. And the nurse told me that you're not just having bad period pain, you're having a bad reaction also to this period pain medication that you're taking. I didn't realize it had caffeine in it, which actually literally makes period cramping worse. So that was my red flag moment of you need to find some alternative solutions here. There must be a better way to be dealing with this pain. And that really sparked my whole journey into looking at the clinical research that's been done on dysmenorrhea, learning about the different types of dysmenorrhea, whether they're rooted in quote unquote normal, uterine contractions, or if they're rooted in some disease state or some inflammation due to tissue growing in different places. And the more I learned, the more I realized that I'm so glad we have birth control. Like you mentioned, I'm not knocking these options. I just think the more options, the better. And the more we can make informed choices, the better. And so in founding Lune, I set out to create one more choice, to add one more option to that pain management toolkit that I think all of us need to have, whether we have endometriosis or not. You know, 90% of us with a menstrual cycle deal with disruptive symptoms for decades, for 40 years. And to me, that's unacceptable. So adding to that toolkit is really my mission with Lune.
This is just so familiar to me listening to
Yeah.
you talk about your experience.
No,
I know the people
been through
listening
it.
have heard my story. I've talked about it ad nauseum at this point, but just what you were saying about missing out on important school things, whether it's classes or labs or tests or whatever, that are going to advance you in life. That was definitely my experience in high school. And then in college, I was already on the pill, but then I was having all
Yeah.
the side effects. So I was missing school in college too. So it was
Yeah.
like a bit of a double whammy. But listening
Right.
to that, it just really is so, it's just such a powerful reminder of how much girls and women really, how much the odds are stacked against us with regard to that. And the fact that then when you go to the doctor, you don't really have a lot of options, as you said. And the goal really is to create more options and more opportunities for us to explore ways to start feeling better. And so I just really appreciate that you took this personal experience of yours and really turned it into something that is so valuable. And I know that you have great reviews of your product. So I know that it's been tremendously helpful for so many.
Yeah, it's really been life-changing. I mean, it started with my own life-changing experience. I didn't go to business school. I was studying engineering. I thought I was going to have a completely different work life career path. But the first night that I tried Cramp Aid with which is our period pain relief formulation, it's all herbs, vitamins, and minerals. I remember I woke up in the middle of the night with my intense pain as usual. And period cramps in the middle of the night are the worst because you typically wake up when the pain is already kind of escalated and then it's impossible to fall back asleep. And I just remember taking the the prototype that we had of Cramp Aid at the time, and then the next thing I remember was waking up like 9 hours later, having had the best sleep, which for me was unheard of. Like, that was the first time I was ever able to sleep like that during my cramping. So yeah, it really spurred me to get it out in the world. And you and I were talking about this earlier, but folks like us who have suffered with pain month after month or chronic pain or different related conditions, we typically know how to take agency in our lives because we have to. Unfortunately, that's the case. Unfortunately, we have been failed a few times or told misleading information or gone down a few rabbit holes that didn't lead to any solution or any relief. And so we've learned and we've had to create our own path. And so when I was starting Lune, I did a lot of market research and we came to this archetype of our consumer who is the desperate hunter. And we refer back to the desperate hunter archetype all the time because that's who I was, that's who you were, that's who our customer is. She's been through it, but she is hunting for better and she knows that or she hopes that better is possible.
It's just so relatable. I have gotten so many emails from women over the years at 2 in the morning, and they've been woken up by their heavy bleeding or their period pain, and they've just at their wits' end,
Worst.
and they've had enough, and they're Googling solutions to
Hmm.
fix these problems.
Oh
So
yeah, 3 a.m.
I've
Google has been
never
my
heard that
favorite
archetype name before, but it is so fitting. I think
Doesn't
for
it just
some
ring true?
so relatable. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think anyone listening can relate in some way. They've had some experience that is similar to that, for sure.
Mhm.
Like you, I haven't ever been diagnosed with endometriosis. Not that, I've ever gone down the path of even attempting to get a diagnosis, but I also had really debilitating period pain, as I mentioned. And,
Mhm.
and who knows? And it improved greatly over the last couple of decades of trying everything.
Mhm.
And so I feel like for those who have these experiences, there's really a degree of relief that you get when you're diagnosed with something. And I sort of missed out on that because I just didn't go down that path, and I just figured, okay, I'll like you said, take ownership and figure this out on my own. But this is Endometriosis Awareness Month, so we're going to talk about it and just talk, I guess, also just talk about the fact that even if you don't and you have severe period pain, there's other reasons you might have it. um, I think that the process of trying to figure out what's going on could really be reduced if we had just better education and understanding of our bodies. Like that's the thing, I was preparing to interview Dr. Jolene Brighton for the podcast about her book that came out, Is This Normal? And the stats in there about women just not even understanding, where their cervix is. It was something like women were shown like an image of the reproductive system and 50% didn't know what the cervix was. And
Yeah.
I just feel like, and when I think about the fact that this information really has been withheld, of course we have no idea where to start when it comes to period pain and what's going on with our menstrual cycle. It's so challenging, and that was one of my biggest things. And I think we're very similar in that, and we wanted to really educate people about what exactly is going on, why is this happening, and here's what you can do about it that will actually address the underlying reasons why you have it. So with all of that said, I think it would be good to talk about the challenges that are associated with the lengthy diagnosis of endometriosis or diagnosis times for endometriosis, and how this delay, whether it's endo or even something else, right, some other pain condition, can, really affect the overall quality of life of someone
Yeah,
who is dealing with this.
absolutely. Thank you for highlighting this. Let's talk about endometriosis. It is wild to me. As soon as you realize that this affects what we believe is more than 10% of women in America, of reproductive age or people who are on a menstrual cycle, more than 10% of them have endometriosis. And yet the average time to diagnosis is 10 years currently. 10 years.
Insane.
Can you like I can't think of any other disease that takes that long to diagnose, but that is the typical journey from when uh, sufferers are first experiencing and reporting symptoms to when they get that diagnosis. And it hasn't been the journey for you and I, but as you said, it can be a really important part of finding relief to have a name for what you're
Mhm.
going through, to have a diagnosis moment. And the reason that I'm actually kind of on a campaign to talk about this month, and why I really want to highlight endometriosis this March for Lune's um, awareness, is my teammate Claire. She was a longtime Lune customer, actually. And when we were hiring for a customer care position, I thought, who better to take care of our customers than someone who's been through it and someone who is a Lune customer and subscriber themselves. So we just put out the call to our community. I didn't even post the job on LinkedIn. I just emailed our Lune community, and Claire responded, and we had great interviews with her. And she is that desperate hunter archetype who's been through it all. And we've been working together for, I think, 2.5 years now. And she didn't have a diagnosis when we started. And this past year, she was first diagnosed with endo. And then they said, actually, you know what? No, we think it's adenomyosis. And the difference between that is just kind of the location of where this uterine lining tissue is growing that's misplaced, that's growing either outside of the uterus or with adenomyosis in that thick muscular wall of the uterus. And so they believe that that's what's happening with Claire. And she has been super transparent about her journey through all of this, and has actually, asked me and given me permission and consent to share her story, because we've been talking about this concept of endo allyship. And I'm referring to endo and adeno really together,
Yeah,
because they're
I was
so
gonna say.
similar. Yeah,
So
like
similar. And I was thinking, actually, as you were saying, the 10-year timeline, I feel like the only other condition I could think of that might take longer is
right.
adeno.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that adeno should get more attention too, because it's really the same kind of inflammatory condition, and this misplaced uterine lining tissue. So she's experiencing that. She's, doing all the research, seeing all the different kinds of practitioners, and sharing her journey along the way with the rest of the team. And I'm just there like, how can I support you? How can I continue to support you? Because that's always been the reason Lune exists, right? And we have this policy on our team. It's the first thing in the handbook that I share whenever we bring someone onto the team, is that you can share whatever you would like to about what's going on in your cycle. So we have a kind of informal practice of sharing where we are in our cycles and what's challenging for us. And we, for us, take your period off, take your menstruation to go rest and recharge. And so for Claire, I was seeing those needs be exacerbated, right? Because she has this intense chronic pain issue with adenomyosis. And it really kind of, it put the spotlight on that condition for me in a way that it hadn't before. And she said, how can we bring Lune to more people who are suffering with endometriosis and adenomyosis? So that's why we are doing this campaign in March for Endo Awareness Month, where if you follow Lune on TikTok or Instagram and let us know if you're suffering, we're going to send you a free cramp aid. We're trying to distribute it as widely as possible, because, like you said, the relief solutions are severely lacking. It's basically birth control, surgery, or pain management. And so Lune would fall under that pain management category, but there is no cure currently. There's no cure. There's this 10-year diagnosis time. This is for hundreds of millions of sufferers worldwide. It's affecting relationships, work, sleep, fertility, everything. And I think that when you see a disparity like that between the prevalence and severity of an issue and the research funding and solutions that are being offered, you can't help but think, okay, this has been systemically overlooked. This has been deprioritized, and that makes me really upset.
For sure. Yes, I would agree with that. And I think it's one thing for us to be living in a society where women's health, generally speaking, is overlooked and not prioritized. But when you have such a severe condition or severe conditions like endo and adeno, and how they impact our quality of life, it's really hard to not be really pissed about the fact that this has not been looked at deeper. But anyway, we're getting there slowly but surely. We're getting there. Not bitter at all. Anyways, I do want to say I feel like I should throw this caveat in there for anyone who's listening who might think or might say something about the uterine lining piece of endo, because I feel like the understanding is that it's similar to uterine lining tissue, but it's different. And so if anyone who's caught up in the details of this condition, I think it's important to just say that there's that thought or yeah,
Yes.
that understanding that it's a little bit different. But I feel like ultimately that doesn't really change the symptoms. It doesn't change the way we need to treat the condition. There's all of these pieces that don't actually change. It's just more, I think,
But
semantics.
it's
But
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying the semantics, because I do sometimes wonder, if we hadn't uh, been speaking about this in a way that's intrinsically linked to the uterus and the uterine lining, would it be taken more seriously, like a cancer? Because I've also heard that this tissue, this type of tissue, can be found in other parts of the body. So
yeah,
it's not just whether it's inside, outside, or on the uterus, but
for sure.
semantics do matter, and I do wonder about the impact that that's had as categorizing it as a gynecological issue or, a women's issue.
Well, it's so interesting you say that, because I completely agree that it potentially has had an impact, because you can find it on the lungs and the diaphragm. It's been found in nasal cavities, on the bowel, obviously. So there are lots of places that the endo tissue ends up. And what I find so interesting is that we have just sort of relegated it to an OBGYN condition, right? So you go
Mhm.
to your gynecologist to deal with this.
Mhm.
And a lot of endo advocates and supporters think that there should be a specialty, like a subspecialty, or
Right.
a specialty for endometriosis, where doctors are trained specifically in this condition, which would make a lot of sense considering the number of people who are dealing with this. So yeah, yeah, I know, right? It's a whole can of worms. But
Mhm.
I did want to come back to what you were talking about with the allyship and things along those lines, because when you think about the severity of this condition for so many, and I've seen this in my comments over the years and emails and in women in my community, and I know you have too, the stories, you truly can't even believe them, right? Because I thought
Right.
I had bad period pain, right? But then I hear what has happened to so many who have this condition. And adenomyosis to everyone who has that condition and wants to feel included, because you are definitely in there.
Yes. Yes.
And I can't get over it. It's hard to even fathom that there's so many women who are on disability and who are literally just living on opioid strength painkillers, and this is basically their lives, and they can't work anymore, they can barely take care of themselves. So maybe we can talk about why it's so important for everyone, not just the people who have this condition, to care about endometriosis, and what are the consequences in our society of neglecting this issue on a societal level.
Yeah, I mean, the consequences are here. It's losing. I mean, if you look at it from a kind of capitalistic perspective, you're losing a huge portion of your workforce. Not that that is the most important, but if we're trying to get large corporations to pay attention to this, they need to be making reasonable accommodations for folks living with any kind of chronic pain issue. Absolutely. Like you're saying, it really takes a toll on your bandwidth. I love the spoonies analogy. I think that came out of chronic disease community, where you only have a certain number of spoons of energy to give. And if that is going to your condition, then you don't have any left to offer your family, your relationships, your work. So I think, we need to make noise about reasonable accommodations at work. I think that is just one angle into the conversation. Um, But yeah, I think the downstream effects on quality of life have been really well documented. It's really a public health crisis that there are so many comorbidities with endometriosis and adenomyosis, with depression and anxiety and IBS, and just so many other issues that are exacerbated by this this state that is not being addressed fully. And so I think when you think of all the folks suffering with endo and how you can support them better, the allyship becomes so important when you think about energy levels. Like, we're all angry hearing this. Some people don't have the energy left to be angry. You know what I mean? Like, the fatigue is so great that comes along with these conditions that there's none left, for let alone for work or family, but there's none left for, you know, sparking of movement or demanding better or advocating at a policy level. Of course not. So we, the rest of the community who really see this issue and can empathize with it deeply because we've been on the periphery of it, I think it's so important for us to just talk about it. And in your workplace, you can ask, what are the accommodations available for endometriosis or for menstrual leave? And there are lots of things that your employers can do to make it a more hospitable working environment. I'm just going there because that's kind of the hot topic when it comes to chronic issues, is like, how do we deal with them in the workforce?
Yeah.
But of course, relationships are huge. If you have a friend who's going through this, really being there to listen and let them vent and navigate the real challenges of finding a practitioner that they feel good about. Because like you said, it's not always a good fit to just go to your gynecologist who may not be specialized in these conditions.
So true. Yeah, I was thinking about that. So on in the various levels of society, like you were just talking about, like there's the workplace, obviously, and you talked about that in your own workplace. We also talk a lot about periods in mine too. Yeah, everybody talks about where they're at in their cycle and what's going on,
Yes.
and can we take the afternoon off, things like that. And I feel like just that alone would be a potential game changer for those who have endo and are really struggling to get work done or whatever it is. I know what it's like 3 days before my period,
Right.
day one of my period, and how challenging it is to even think straight, much less actually be a productive member of society. So
Right.
I am curious about your thoughts on what that could look like. What would an ideal workplace situation look like for someone? Well, I guess any of us, really.
Yeah. I think it starts with trust. I think it starts with, your teammates are people that you trust enough to make the best decisions for their bodies. And a lot of workplaces, I think, lack that trust. And so there's this kind of prove it energy. So if you're saying you need the afternoon off, well, prove it. And proof with these conditions that we're talking about specifically is frustratingly difficult sometimes, because a lot of times this tissue doesn't show up on imaging and you don't have this diagnosis for years, and the surgery is very invasive and kind of a last resort. So you can have suspected endometriosis for years, and you feel invisible because if your friends or your family or your boss don't accept that you have a real serious chronic condition, they can easily write it off and
Yeah.
just kind of start to roll your eyes. Oh, she's taking the afternoon off again. Uh, and my colleague Claire talks about this all the time. It's like it's been extremely healing for her to be part of the Lune team, where we are up to date on her journey and can talk about it, so that she never feels like there's distrust, and she knows that she's trusted to make the best decisions for when she's resting and when she's working for her body. So I think it starts there. And
Can I just
menstrually,
say really quickly, I just really want to just shout this out because I am so happy you brought this up. I didn't really ever think of it in this context, but the fact that there's a trust issue in
mhm,
so many workplaces that
yeah,
women feel like they constantly have to prove that they are in debilitating pain. I mean,
Yes.
I think that we feel like we have to prove that in doctors' offices all the time, right? That I am actually in so much pain I might pass out every single month, and then
Yeah.
be told in a very gaslighty way, well, it's just period cramps. This is what it's like to have a period. Welcome to being a woman, blah, blah, all
Yeah.
this nonsense that we hear. And so I guess it just never occurred to me that you're in a situation where you have to prove something to someone or your
Mhm.
boss or whoever, your coworkers, and how much harder it must make having this kind of condition, because we know, right, it's the invisible condition, invisible chronic disease. And then if you can't, the only way to get a diagnosis literally is through surgery, at least the most accepted way, because now we have ultrasound and that seems to be making its way into the world, which is so exciting. But traditionally it's surgery and that's it. And so who's getting surgery to get diagnosed? Very few people. So I can only imagine the added layer that you just described.
Exactly. Exactly. It's such a trust issue. And to me, it's like, okay, if you hired someone that you don't trust, that's on you, employer. If you hired them, you should believe in them and you should trust that they are intelligent and in tune with themselves enough to know when requesting time off is important and when it's going to support their health. So we have that deep trust built in. And I think menstrual leave has been such a hot topic. People love to hate it
I
because
do.
I
Yeah.
think it does, raise some questions about like, talking about your period at work and the stigma there. And then also the fear with some women that people will start to make assumptions about them. So, if you're ever in a bad mood at work or upset about something, people might say, oh, she has PMDD. Well, she's on her period. Like she talks about it all the time, and then start to make assumptions about you and lump in different states that you're in based on that. So I think that's a really important. I think it just comes down to cultural practice on teams is that you can be open and encouraging of all of this information and still not make assumptions because sometimes I'm in a bad mood because something bad has happened. Sometimes I'm upset about this specific circumstantial piece that's happening with our business or whatever the day has brought about. And I don't want that to be just, grouped in with, oh, she's PMSing. So I think it's really a fine line between like opening and inviting these conversations and yeah, just making assumptions about your teammate. So I think menstrual leave is very, very simple in practice. Claire coined this phrase that on our team, PTO equals period time off.
Love
Um,
that.
I love it so much, and
So
she made a
good.
talk about it, and people just loved it because she was kind of like showing off all the things I did today on my period instead of working. And people were like, hire me. Where is this dream workplace? How can I do this? And it's really not like complicated to do. I think a lot of companies are moving away from a specific set time of PTO to unlimited PTO. And that's essentially what it is, trusting that your teammates know when to take time off and when to prioritize rest. And it's not this zero-sum game of like, this is all the PTO I can take in a year. It's just listening to your body, knowing when your symptoms are flaring or when your period is coming to really respect that because it will pay off in dividends when you are ready to get back into it.
Yeah, I really think that this plays into what we all in our little women's health world talk about, which is, living in harmony with your cycle
Mhm.
syncing, however you want to call it. And that's really being so tuned into your cycle that you know when to push and when to pull back.
Yes.
And that, right, I think is really what I feel like this is the foundation of what you're really talking about here.
Yeah, cycle syncing is definitely the foundation of how our team works. And I think this is the next evolution of respecting periods at the workplace. I think first and foremost, we have to get relief products and hygiene products like very available. And I think that's where a lot of these menstrual equity conversations started. There was a lot of press and media around the tampon tax, which was exciting to see. But this new wave is really about how are we managing our wellness. This is so much more than managing blood flow. It's managing our energy and our productivity and our relationships and our sleep and fertility, all of the things that we've talked about. So I think step one is, workplaces support those needs in the way of time off, reasonable accommodations, uh, trust and communicative cultures, and of course, having products available if you do have a physical workplace. And then the next level is where I think the fun really comes in, where you can start to appreciate the beauty of all the phases of the cycle. So this is kind of the utopic vision that we're trying to live out on our team today. It's not accessible if you don't have that first phase in place already. But what we try to live as a team at Lune is, what would this look like, if this was just a normal workplace habit to be synced up with our cycles. So we are very open about where we all are in terms of our phases, and we see them as our inner seasons. And so that's why rest is so, so important during the menstrual phase, especially if you have a chronic condition, but for anyone really, because it's your inner winter. And of course, you have the lowest energy that you do all cycle. Luteal phase can be really difficult because it's the fall where you're shedding your leaves. And when you start to have fun with that and translate that to, how you plan your projects, it could be really beautiful. So I used to kind of resist my luteal phase in a big way because it felt like the downward spiral. I was starting to dread my period. All the symptoms were coming back. But when I look at it in the lens of, this is my autumn, I take on this like autumnal energy where I'm turning more introspective. I'm starting to focus on details, tying up loose ends. And so I don't take on any new projects in my luteal or menstrual phase. That's a hard no for me. I reserve brainstorming and creative projects and new projects for my follicular phase and try to really have them reach a culmination by the time I ovulate. And my teammates know this. So we get to share that and share that workflow. And we're not working in person typically. So we're not, we're all on different cycles. And it's nice to be able to kind of pass the baton to the next teammate when you are at a certain stage of the product or a project. Like, okay, I got this brainstorm done. Here's a few visions I have for the Instagram content or whatever this month. Sarah, can you take a look at it? I'm heading into my luteal phase.
That's so awesome.
It's been really fun to play with.
It's so great. I think that, like you said, it's utopian.
Right. That's the vision.
Yeah,
That's
that's the
vision.
goal. We're holding that vision.
And I
For
fully realize
everyone.
that this is like, we really have to get through that phase one first. Like, this is relief and understanding are key. And I don't mean to bypass this. I'm just offering, the beauty that is available on the other side of it. And I also want to mention, like, we've been talking about uh, more severe ends of the spectrum of having a chronic condition like endometriosis, but that conversation and that allyship does not belittle at all or negate the experience of just having bad periods. That's what I don't want to come out of this conversation, is like, oh, I thought mine are bad, but they must be fine compared to hers. Like, no, your pain is your pain and it exists on so many levels. And just because we're talking about these more extreme states doesn't mean that the more mild or moderate states don't deserve all of this recognition and relief as well.
It's so true. And it's a really potent reminder, I think, for all of us to trust that this is what we're experiencing and not to compare our experiences to other experiences. Because I agree, I've definitely done that too. In fact, I think I even said that earlier. So yeah, it's certainly important for us to keep that in mind. Coming to what your mission is really with Lune, can we talk a little bit more about the pain relief toolkit, the menstrual pain relief toolkit that you'd mentioned throughout, are there specific innovations or trends that people should be aware of? And what criteria should they consider when selecting supplements or other pain relief methods or period support products?
Yeah, I would always look at the research that of the brands that you are, you know, citing or checking out. If they have done their research, they will show you, and they will show you all of the studies that their formulations are based on and why they made those decisions. Um, I think that that is really key, especially now, because there's a lot of exciting research happening. PubMed is your friend. If you just get in there and search an ingredient name, like take fenugreek, for example, there have been really fascinating clinical trials of fenugreek in the last 10, 15 years. And this is an example of an herb that's been used since ancient times, traditionally in Ayurvedic medicine. And now clinical research, these double-blind, placebo-controlled trials are taking a closer look. And I love it when that happens, that a traditional use for an herb, vitamin, or mineral is then validated with this, different form of rigorous research. And so for me, that's really exciting to see. And I always want to see the latest studies that are happening. I think, you know, herbal medicine in the US has had this bad reputation for the last few decades. In some ways, I think the consumer here has become very skeptical of herbal medicine, and for good reason. I think that some brands really took it to a level that was not based in research. Um, my particular pet peeve is when a brand of herbs or supplements says that they are using evidence-based ingredients, and they are. And then I check the label and it's in tiny, tiny amounts. Like, okay, yes, you did put ginger in there, but it's a fraction of a therapeutic dose. So
I
really
love that you're
beyond,
saying this, by the way. I love this so much because I feel like this is just a conversation I had with a women's health doctor friend of mine just this morning about the therapeutic doses of ingredients. So keep on, anyway, keep going. It's just my little
no, it's
interjection.
absolutely. I talk about it all the time because it's so important to use that expression. It's an evidence-based ingredient and have it be true, but yet the product is not going to do anything noticeable for you anyway, because you're not reaching that dose that was used in a trial and shown to be effective and safe. So always look for, if it's a mineral, the recommended daily dose of it. If it's an herb, look for that clinical trial. Um, and we don't have clinical trials for all of the herbs. There are so many that have really fascinating histories and uses for different reproductive issues or menstrual issues or just inflammation, things in general. And I'm excited to see, hopefully, research move in the direction of funding more of these alternative medicines and showing at what dosages they are safe and effective. Um, Particularly cool study put ginger head to head with over-the-counter painkillers with, I think, just ibuprofen. And they were shown to be just as effective with fewer side effects. The folks taking ginger had the same outcome.
I
And
love
I'm
those
happy
studies.
to
Those are
share.
so satisfying.
It's
Seeing
so
those studies.
cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool to see this ingredient that we're all so familiar with, that we, can tolerate very well, and that has lots of other health benefits, can also be used to really great effect in this way. So, you know, knowing that we're all desperate hunters, I'm sure that this will be familiar territory to those listening, but really try to find a clinical study on an ingredient that you're interested in and find out what is the dose that worked, and then check it with your supplement and see if it meets your standard of whether or not this is actually going to help. Um, and of course, checking reviews is always critical as well. I think it's really helpful to read through reviews or search for your specific keyword of something that you're suffering with, to see if other users have had that experience. So, for example, Lune, we make dietary supplements. We do not claim to treat, diagnose any diseases. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to support your own management of your health and help you support your own well-being. So we're not going to go out and say, cramp aid is going to stop your endometriosis or treat your endometriosis. That's not the place of a dietary supplement. The way that you can see if it'll help for you is by comparing other people's experiences. And I think this is how community can be so, so helpful, is just, you can really get into the specifics of what kind of symptoms you have, what kind of symptoms other people have, comparing notes and finding a toolkit that works for you, and also combining methods that work for you. So in Claire's case, she now uses Lune, of course, to manage her pain. She also sees a pelvic floor therapist, and that's been extremely helpful for her. So she's kind of honed in on the combination of modalities that is really helping her live life to the fullest.
Just such great information. Thank you so much. I would love for you to talk a little bit before we wrap up about the campaign that Lune has launched and what they're doing with Cramp Aid to help those with endometriosis.
Yes, I'm so excited about this. So we were brainstorming as a team how we can best support the endo community and adeno community, of course, and how we can be true allies. And we have very limited marketing budget this season. And I think a lot of women's health brands, unfortunately, do right now. It's been a hard fundraising season for everyone. So just shout out to anyone else with a small business at this moment. We are really weathering some headwinds. And for us, it's just so critical to continue the work that we're doing, continue getting relief out, because we know firsthand how urgently our customers are depending on it. So for March, for our endo campaign, we thought it would be kind of radical and joyful to just give away Cramp Aid to folks who are suffering with endometriosis. And I'll check with my teammate, but I think that we would love to include folks with adenomyosis as well in that. Just message us and let us know. We'll get your address and send you Cramp Aid right away. It's something we've never done. We usually, like any other business, have certain seasonal sales or promotions, but we just really wanted to get Cramp Aid into the hands of more people on this end of the spectrum and see how it can support. And there's no obligation, like there's no strings attached. We really just know how urgently it's needed. And hopefully this shines a spotlight on, the hardships, the absolute burden that these people are dealing with. And my hope for the campaign is that it really inspires more brands and more practitioners to take action and to take these conditions really seriously and, fund more research. We really need it.
We really do. Mimi, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and your knowledge. I really am so grateful that you came on the podcast. And I want you to tell everyone where they can find Cramp Aid, because I'm sure people are like, wait, I have other options. Where can I find this stuff?
Have other options, yes. Come find us. We're at delune.co. It's delune.co. And make sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram, because that's where we'll be posting about this endo campaign, and you can get your free Cramp Aid. We're Lune Care on social media.
Amazing. Thank you again so much for all your advocacy and your work. Really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for everything you've done. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at nicolejardim.com/quiz.